Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of the This Week Sports Roundtable. I'm copy editor Andy Resnik, and we are going to preview the football playoffs. So it seems like yesterday that we were recording our season preview, and today we're going to dive into first-round matchups and discuss whether any teams from Central Ohio have what it takes to win 5 playoff games and capture a state championship. Joining me are Ryan Baker, who is host of the AM820 Scoreboard Show, and This Week Sports writers Dave Purpura to my left and Jarrod Ulrey to my right, or as I called them on Twitter the other day, the usual suspects. So before we dive into the opening matchups, do you guys have any thoughts about the regular season, especially what was a wild Week 10 that set the playoff field?
Well, you know, you mentioned actually on the notes, about Pickerington North and Lancaster finishing 10th and 11th in the region. I mean, Division I, Region 3 is pretty deep. I mean, you think about it. I mean, and I know that when Pick North was able to win that game the other night, I think they were kind of cautiously optimistic that they might still make the playoffs. But just a lot of things just had to happen, and and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure. But then you've got the Division I, Region 2, where I think there's 3, 5, and 5 teams that made it. So it is really it's kind of interesting. I mean, Ohio does their playoff system differently than some other states do. So,
and I think we'll talk about it more, as you said. We'll get into the Lancasters, the Pick Norths, the Canals, things like that. But I don't know if I remember a year where Central Ohio football was as deep as it was this year. I remember back in Week 3, Lee and I talking about it on the Scoreboard Show. Man, there's a lot of good teams in this area. Lancaster was sitting 0-3 at that time, and you're like, there's not a better 0-3 team in the state than these guys, especially with the passing offense that they created this year and Tyler Monk. But, I mean, just the depth of quality football teams is what sticks out to me in 2018.
And I heard you two talking on the show the other night. What was it, after Week 4, none of the Olentangy teams had a winning record. They were all 1-3 or something like that. And I should say 3 of the 4 because we have the 4th school now. And but all of them ended up making the playoffs. I mean, they're a good story. Reynoldsburg, to me, is probably the story of the year. I mean, we're going to talk about them more, but I mean, just the way that they became one of those dominant teams. But there are a lot of other dominant
we sure could have thought we'd be saying the same thing about Canal Winchester if they were in one of the other regions.
Yeah, well, I'm mentioning that shortly.
And that's something, the Canal Winchester angle, or Pickerington North and Lancaster and Canal. Pickerington North, 10th in Region 3, Lancaster 11th, would have made it in other Division I regions. Canal was 9th, one spot for making it in Division II Region 7. They would have been in other Division II regions. I know Dave, before this started, Dave and I were talking very briefly about Canal missing out. And I mean, you cover them. So, I mean, do you want to share some thoughts on how, I mean, the way the system works, the best teams aren't always getting in, and this year that's the case.
Well, they were less than a quarter of a point behind Walnut Ridge from getting in. And I was adding this up, I'll be writing my season recap here in the next day or so. In the other Division II regions, they would have been 4th in Region 5, 5th in 6th and 8. 8 is the region that Olentangy ultimately made it into at 5-5. Dublin-Scioto, also one of the schools in that region. Now for Division I, they would have been 8th in Region 1, 3rd in Region 2, 3rd in Region 2, and 3rd in Region 4. It's incredible.
Home game in Region 2, they would have had a home game. That's insane.
Yeah, it is, and that was that region with all those 5-5 teams that you were mentioning, and another 5-5 team in Upper Arlington very nearly made it.
Yeah. I mean, they lost one game. I mean, to say that you have to go undefeated to make the playoffs in certain regions and go 5-5 and still make the playoffs in a different region.
So what should the OHSAA do about that? I don't know. I don't know that there's a real obvious answer, because just the way that the map was divided this year, it just randomly kind of worked out that way in Division I.
I know I've heard a lot
was in Region 3 last year.
I've heard a lot of people, and Leah said this before, seed them 1 through 32. Don't even have the regions. I don't know if that's the answer.
Some long trips in Week 1.
Absolutely, for sure. The thing that sticks out to me about Canal, though, you don't play the toughest schedule, and I know that's not your fault or whatnot, but you can't lose to Thomas Worthington. I mean, that's the thing, and I know it's a season opener and things happen, and I'm sure Canal's like, our 9-1 team this year, would hammer our 6-4 team last year that made it in as an 8 seed. But you can't lose to Thomas. I mean, you can't do that, especially if you don't have any room for leeway. And unfortunately, they didn't have that room, and it cost them. I mean, that Region 7, 3 teams 10-0. I mean, what can you do? Massillon, Washington has the most computer points of any team in the state, and they're in your region, and maybe, you know, if you're Canal, you're like, well, at least we don't, I mean, you want in, but hey, at least we don't have to face what Walnut Ridge is facing this week.
Yeah, I mean, I made sure that I covered that Northland Whitehall game in week 2 because I'm like, this is a huge game. I mean, you can kind of sense, because I knew Northland was going to be really good. Maybe they wouldn't even have made the playoffs even with a win. I mean, who knows? Because they would have been 9-1, and they, you know, Northland ends up 4 points away from making the playoffs, or from being 10-0, and they go 8-2.
Short of this 1-32, which I think is an intriguing idea, although, like you said, I mean, you could have some monster. I mean, the high school my mother went to, St. Mary's Memorial, is hosting a team that is from over 200 miles away, or roughly 200 miles away in Pepper Pike Orange coming up on Friday. They're in the same region, and you'd have a lot more of that coming up. My point, last year, Region 7 was not nearly as good as it was. Canal got in at 6-4. New Albany, I was 6-4 or 7. I'm trying to remember what they were last year, got all the way to the regional final. It was one of those years the region wasn't as good last year as it is this year. I mean, so what are you going to do? That's the only thing. You know, it's going to happen every year. There was another 9-1 team that was left out. 9-8-2 teams saw that as well. It's just
the other thing we have to remember is that the OHSAA is not. They not only focus on getting the best teams into playoffs or postseasons, but they believe in representation. Whether you disagree with that philosophy or not, we see it in the other sports like
golf especially.
Golf and tennis, you know, but especially boys and girls golf, where, you know, in division, like we had the state champions in all 3 divisions in boys golf, yet in divisions 2 and 3, there's only 1 school that even made it to state, you know, because they're into this representation.
Yeah, every area has to be represented, not necessarily the best teams. That to me is an issue, especially in golf, and it has to be. I think it ought to be addressed, and it gives us fodder to talk about with some good ideas, like you mentioned. I don't know that it's going to change.
But you know what the fun thing, and this kind of circles back to where we started in this, there was a lot of years where if we went 1-for-32 and you want the best teams in, you wouldn't be talking about Central Ohio teams that much.
Right.
You'd be talking about Cincinnati. You'd be talking about Cleveland. You'd be talking about Toledo. Not this year, and that's what I think. That's just the cool part about this is that what we started this with is the depth of Central Ohio football, and we may not be having this conversation if we're going 1-through-32 or get the best teams in, however you want to do it, in years past. But we are now, and that's what I like about it.
Yeah.
Well, we should
break down some matchups.
Well, that too. I was going to say, with your point about Central Ohio, you have a case with Liberty was a state semifinalist last year. Pick Central won a state title. Davidson's won 2 state titles. So over the last 10, 12 years, I think Central Ohio has gotten on the same level as Cleveland and Cincinnati.
Or in Division 1, right?
In Division 1.
Mm-hmm.
Where they weren't, when we were all kids, it was Cleveland versus Cincinnati.
Yeah,
pretty much
Every year. And Upper Arlington winning it in 2000 was such a novelty.
Was the first.
Area because we hadn't had one around here.
Well, in Division 1, it was the first.
And one thing I didn't get to say earlier, everybody, all these divisions, they play by the same rule. It's all the computer points. There is no human element or emotion that goes into this, like a couple years ago where we all thought Ohio State had a really good chance to get into the playoffs over Penn State, whether they should have or shouldn't have. There are no biases or anything like that here. All the computer systems or all the teams earn the points by the same system. And that's the thing. Nobody's getting screwed out of a playoff.
So that way, though, it's really upon the schools to have good non-conference schedules. And so you can build up computer points.
Yes, you can't
that's
do
easier said than done, actually.
Right. I mean,
absolutely.
You're kind of hamstrung it like at Canal, because at Canal you're not going to play Hilliard-Davidson. You're not going to play Pickerington Central.
But and the other thing that goes back to that, you got to take care of your business. You got to take care of the games that you should win, that you can win. I mean, we have a perfect example of that in Division III this year with Watterson. They finished 5-5, great season for them, but they're less than a minute away from being 7-3 and possibly in the playoffs. But they didn't handle their business.
Although they did beat Orange.
They did, but then you lose to a winless Ursuline, or you lose to a winless Ursuline team and a not very good Benedictine team on the last play of the game. You win those 2 games. Maybe we're talking about Watterson this week in that. So you've got to win the games you should, and that's the one thing when I was looking at this. For Canal, unfortunately, you lost to Thomas. You can't say anything, in my opinion. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, and I love Jack Beeler. He's a heck of a quarterback, and Josh Stratton's doing great things over there. But 9-1, you'd think you're in.
Yeah. Well, Jarrod mentioned before the matchups, but before we go into that, we should, as a reminder, that Division 1, 2, 3, and 6 playoff games are Friday, 4, 5, and 7 are Saturday, and just like the regular season, we'll have coverage of our Teams from This Week coverage area at thisweeksports.com. Follow the guys on Twitter, tweeting and Facebooking all the stories afterward, photos, all that stuff. So, let's start with the matchups. Division 1, Region 2 is where I figure we should start. Reynoldsburg, 9-1, top seed. It's going to play Toledo Start. OCC Ohio co-champs with Lancaster. Jarrod, you cover Reynoldsburg. Best year for them in early 60s?
Ever. This is their best team, I think. I mean, okay, I didn't follow the 2001 team as closely as I'm following this one. And, so no disrespect to that team. I'm sure that was, they were coached by Tony Busteri, and they were a great team. But, this is the best team for sure in the Buddy White era. There's no question about it, because they've gone with the defense. Defense is the big thing for them. They got great defensive linemen, great linebackers. They got 2 pick sixes the other night on top of that. So, and defense is going to take them a long way. And on top of that, they've got guys on offense that can make plays. They are. I know Coach White is focusing on making it so they have a more consistent type of offense as they head into the playoffs. And frankly, if they don't, I think it would be a huge upset if they don't win Week 1. When they're playing a Toledo Start team that's it's a nice story, but they play in the Toledo City League up there. It's not a very quality type of football in that league, and they were kind of lucky to get in. So I would expect this would be the type of week that Reynoldsburg can kind of get their juices flowing, kind of get rolling a little bit onto when things get a little bit tougher in Week 2 of the playoffs.
One thing I noticed, watching them, the Lancaster game last Thursday night, Reynoldsburg just has so many athletes.
They do.
And like you mentioned, playmakers on offense. I know that, Mershawn Rice, we got a couple notes on Twitter. Why didn't we nominate him for Player of the Week?
We could have. He was in the discussion. Yeah.
I think
he made 2 incredible plays in that game, just like he did in one of the Pickerington games. And we're in week 11 now, and my head is kind of full of information, so I can't remember which one. But he had like a 98-yard interception return in one of the games too. So yeah, he's a great playmaker. It's
pretty much every week for him. That's one of the huge things about them. You talked about their athletes. They've got 5 Division I kids on this team. That's no joke. Lee and I talked about this on the Scoreboard Show. I didn't have all year on a Thursday night people texting me about a game like I did that Reynoldsburg-Lancaster game, and it was because those Reynoldsburg, they're not just athletes, they're big athletes.
Oh, yeah.
They're big size, but I think that's huge for a lot of these teams, and we'll talk about a lot of these playoff teams. You got to have that game breaker, and Mershawn Rice is that guy. He's going to Purdue for a reason, and he's something special.
Yeah, at the beginning of the season when we did the podcast, I was very adamant. I'm like, I think this is one of Reynoldsburg's best teams. I didn't always stick with it during the regular season, and I really wish I would have, but because they really were.
But that's because we've always seen these Reynoldsburgs where they've had that game where the penalties or the turnovers or the discipline, something in there, and we just haven't seen that this year. Even in the Gahanna game that they lost, I don't think they gave that game away. Gahanna just played really stingy defense that night and didn't allow them to beat them and score on defense and special teams like some of these teams did. You don't expect Pickerington Central to do that, but they did. They made turnovers in that game, and Reynoldsburg capitalized.
Well, and that's what I was wondering a moment ago is, how did that Reynoldsburg-Gahanna game, well, whatever went wrong, they certainly got out of their system in a hurry because they recorded those big wins.
Gahanna's got a
later
great
in the year.
defense.
Yes.
And I thought that Gahanna played really great against when they played Pickerington Central. I mean, they lost that game 27-13, but I thought they played a really good game that night. And is that the one you want to talk about next?
Well,
against
we can talk Gahanna Liberty. I was going to say Kaufman Westerville Central. Why don't we just keep in that region? We can go with Gahanna and Liberty. You cover Gahanna and Liberty. So,
this is a couple teams that maybe didn't have exactly the type of regular seasons that they were hoping, but it's a new life, and there's an opportunity for both of them. And this actually was in our predictions this week. This was the one that I had the toughest time deciding between. So,
same.
Liberty has shown flashes of being as good of a team as they were the last couple of years. I mean, they don't have they don't have a Brendan White this year, but they've got lots of really good players. They have lots of experience.
Mm-hmm. The thing that made me wonder, they looked so good for a half against Olentangy, and they had to hold Olentangy off, and then they were held to 3 points against Olentangy Orange. That's one thing that really has made me wonder, even though Liberty played so well after those early injuries, exactly where they are. And this is an Olentangy Orange team that got in the playoffs, was playing their best down the season, or down the stretch, and they're going to go up to Whitmer. So, yeah, that definitely made it hard for me, too, and Gahanna playing as well against those good opponents in that league. They went and pulled a first-round upset last year. I see no reason they can't do that again.
What's interesting to me about this game is, and I may be way off on this, but everybody keeps saying, and you just said it, Jarrod, how good of a defense Gahanna has. They've given up over 30 points 4 times and gave up 40 points to New Albany.
Those are some good teams there. They've kind of turned around since New Albany.
I understand, but they've given up a lot of points this year, and I don't think we can discount, and I'm not saying anybody is, but we can't discount Liberty's experience here the past couple years, making it to state semifinals. And we talked about that one player. Justice Harris is pretty good. I don't know if he's that guy, if he's that good for Gahanna, but I think Mitchell Oakley is for Olentangy Liberty, and he's even done it on his feet this year too sometimes when he had to. And maybe Liberty doesn't have the record they do if he doesn't get hurt earlier in the year and miss a couple games as well. I just don't see Gahanna winning this game. I think that experience factor of Liberty, and not, Bruce Ward's coached in big games too, but Hale has gotten this team to 2 straight state semifinals. I don't think Gahanna overcomes that experience. I don't think their defense is good enough to overcome Oakley in that experience. And I could be wrong, but I just think Liberty gets this game.
And speaking of, Gahanna's 5-5, Westerville Central's 5-5. So Westerville Central's got Kaufman. Kaufman's another one of those teams, like Reynoldsburg. Tons of athletes at Kaufman. That's a tough game for Central.
Yeah, real tough. Westerville Central has shown flashes of being a very good team this year.
Dante Hunter.
Yeah, great player.
He is sensational.
Yeah.
He is a great player. Is he as good as Harrison? I don't know if he's as good as Harrison, Zach Harrison from Orange, but
he is their Zach Harrison.
He is their Zach Harrison. He's a great player, and I was really impressed with LeBron Davis, the quarterback. This is going to sound like maybe kind of crazy, but when Cardell Jones played for Glenville, and Cardell was 6'5", but kind of skinny and hadn't really filled out yet, that's what LeBron Davis reminded me of. I thought throws a nice ball, is just a great athlete. Kaufman is just loaded with players.
They are. I think we can talk about Kaufman this year kind of in the same way about Reynoldsburg, as they're different because they do it on defense. And they've kind of been transitioned in that way. They did it a little bit last year, and they've really done it this year. Coach Crabtree has talked about it all year. Their defense is the difference maker this year. Mike Drennan is a heck of a player on offense, and he's great, and they've got other guys as well, but their defense is their difference maker. And I like, you mentioned LeBron Davis, I like him. I think he's a good quarterback, but I don't think he has enough help in this one for that Kaufman defense. I wouldn't be surprised if this one's a running clock.
Coach Crabtree is, just from reading season wrap-ups the last few years, he's this whole thing where they make the playoffs and maybe make it to the second round. He wants more. And that's probably a big reason why they put so much of a focus on defense.
I was extremely impressed with their defense against Upper Arlington the other day. They had a touchdown on defense. I think UA, if they didn't outgain them in that game, not remembering the stats right offhand, it was really close. And that's what ultimately made the difference. And, I don't think I need to tell any of you how horrid the weather was on Friday night. And that's what, teams needed to lean on their defenses, and that's what Kaufman did. And that's why I like their chances here to get through the next couple of weeks. And you mentioned Mike Drennan. Musa Diallo is another guy that they can really lean on to get a lot of yards in their running game. So you're probably going to hear about him during the playoffs.
Since we're talking about Kaufman, we can jump over to Kaufman's rival in the OCC Central, which is Hilliard-Davidson. Different region. We'll go to Division I, Region 3.
Skip the Orange game.
Well, we did talk about Orange, so
they go to Toledo Whitmer.
Yeah, and you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
Zach Harrison.
Whitmer's pretty good, I think.
Yeah.
From a little bit of research.
I think
they lost to Liberty in the regional
I think
final.
Coach Schroeder. I read Scott Hennon's preview. Coach Schroeder said they've got a lot of athletes at Whitmer. Orange. Harrison is such a weapon. As a blocker, as a receiver, as a pass rusher. He's the kind of guy who maybe could help them win a game like that. He really is. But do they, kind of like in the Westerville Central, do they have enough?
Yeah, and I don't know. I think it's great to talk about Harrison, but I think the wild card for them is Robbie Dayoff, how he plays at quarterback, because he's another guy that can do it on his feet and he can throw it. I'm not sure Orange has enough. Whitmer, we talked about the Toledo City League schools up there, and the Toledo City League schools aren't that good, but Toledo Whitmer is.
They're in a different league too.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But they're a Toledo team that's been there year in and year out, and played in state championship games, played in state semifinal games. They're a big time program. I'm just not sure. I don't think Orange can get it done even with Harrison and Dayoff.
And for big time programs, Davidson, even though they're the 1 seed and they've had a great bounce back year because they didn't make the playoffs last year, which is very unusual for them. They're playing Huber Heights Wayne, and Davidson is 2-time state champion in 06-09, and Wayne, in my notes, state runner-up 1999, 2010, 2014, 2015. That's a really tough matchup. It's 1-8. It almost seems more like a 1-2.
Yeah, it's a tough matchup because of, I think, the history of the programs at Huber Heights Wayne. Braxton Miller, you mentioned all the state championships, but I don't think this Wayne team is what we've seen from Wayne teams in the past. They had to get and it's a big win beating Trotwood Madison, but they had to win that game in week 10 to get in. So I don't, the way Davidson's played this year, and Brian White, I never bet against him anyway, I just think, I don't think this is going to be too tough of a game. It's going to be close because Davidson doesn't blow out a lot of teams, obviously, but I think Davidson's going to handle them pretty easily.
We'd have to look back, but I don't think Davidson has lost too many first-round playoff games over the years. A lot of times they've been in a lot of them, and usually they make it to at least the semifinal or the regional final, like almost every year. So.
Especially being at home.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Although they are playing on turf now.
Yeah.
They do have the turf.
Sure. Although, this is one of the better Davidson teams I can remember seeing. This is my 8th season covering here, and this might be the best. This is sure one of the best Davidson teams that I've seen in this stretch.
And it's weird, and it's not like Lancaster because they haven't done it as much, but Davidson has needed big plays this year. They've turned to their passing game a couple times.
Yeah.
They've thrown it just a little more, and seeing a 66-yard touchdown pass from Davidson. What is that? That's you never heard of that before, but they can rely on that at least. There's been some years where they couldn't get that play from the passing game, and at least they can this year.
Mm-hmm. Our game of the week this week, and it's by far the most intriguing matchup. It's Pickerington Central is going to Hilliard Bradley. Central beat Bradley last year on its run to the state championship. This year, Bradley's the higher seed. Bradley's the 3 seed, has the game at home. Central has lost twice, so they're the 6 seed. They're the defending state champs, loaded with players from last year. We're going to be there for Facebook Live, by the way, on Thursday at 3:30. Dave and Scott Hennon, who covers Bradley, will join us and Coach Purpura Thursday at 3:30. So this game, like I said, game of the week, most intriguing matchup, and it seems like Bradley's almost the underdog, even though they're at home and they're the higher seed. So how does Bradley win this game? Jarrod, do you want to? You cover Pick Central, so
take a stab at it. Well, I think what they have to do is they have to not. It's going to sound so cliche. They have to not make a lot of mistakes against a defense like Pickerington Central, because it's going to come down to how does Hilliard Bradley's offensive line create enough opportunities for Griffin Vale to make steady passes to his receivers. And they have a very good running back too, but that's kind of more secondary. I mean, they've proven that they've had one of the best passing games in Central Ohio the last couple of years, and it doesn't like they've slotted to different guys. Like this is the third different quarterback in 3 seasons they've had.
Great.
And yet, Griffin Vale here thrown for 2,400 yards and 24 touchdowns. So how did they handle Pickerington Central's defense, which everybody starts thinking about? You start with Dwayne Carter and Carter Johnson, the guys that are the big time recruits, and they're huge, they're fast, they're experienced, they're extremely difficult to deal with. And then on top of that, a few other guys have started to really emerge for Pickerington Central, like guys like Don Marasco, Ty Hamilton, and then they've got. I mean, yes, they don't have Xavier Henderson this year. They don't have. And he was a lot more of a difference maker than, I mean, he was like a Zach Harrison. Like you put him at wide receiver and he could make a huge play. You put him in the defense in the secondary and he do pass breakups or just make it extremely difficult because he's such a great athlete. They don't necessarily have. I mean, they have a couple guys that are kind of similar to that, but not quite to that level. So. But yeah, I mean, I think it's going to come down to how does this matchup stack up in the trenches, really?
One thing that stands out to me, and you talked about, hey, obviously at this point, least mistakes are going to win the game. Over the years, Central has been a team that has committed a lot of penalties. And one article
that you wrote a while ago.
They
don't make turnovers.
That's what I was going to build on that by saying. One of your articles, maybe it was earlier this year, it might have been last year, is that's something that does not keep Jay Sherritt up at night. Because it gives them, yes, because he likes seeing them play aggressive, and a lot of times it will pay off. So, I mean, even if they rack up some penalty, it's not necessarily a bad thing for Central, and I do remember Jay saying something about that in the past.
It's just about them being, they're Central Ohio's most physical team. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you gauge that other than just they know how to, they're strong, but they also know how to make physical plays, I guess, on defense. And that's why every year when we go to the all-district meetings, like, well, their best running back had 600 yards, but their 4 best players are all on defense. I mean, that's the way it is every year.
And it's funny, you talk about no Xavier Henderson. Obviously, he's great. He's playing for Michigan State this year, getting a lot of time. Terry Samuel and Lorenzo Stiles are pretty good.
Absolutely.
Lorenzo Stiles may be Xavier Henderson in 2 years when he's a senior. This is just a sophomore we're talking about. But Carter Johnson is so dominant on the defensive line. And when I started looking into this game a little bit the past couple of days, and when it first comes out, you heard me, I said, poor Coach Purpura, because there's no part of me in looking at this game that thinks Bradley wins this game. But the thing that scares me even more now after looking to it, Bradley's first 4 weeks, they had close games. They went to overtime with Finley. They beat Stone Monroe Falls by 1. Obviously the close game with Davidson and then the close game with Darby. They haven't had a close game since that in week 4. I mean, all of their games have been blowouts. I mean, Scioto was close in the first half, but then they just destroyed Scioto in the second half. I don't know how Bradley, after 6 weeks of not playing a close game, handles Pickerington Central. There's something to playing games, tough games, having to play tough games as you head to the playoffs, and they just haven't had to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is one concern when I spoke with Coach Purpura on Sunday, that he's a little concerned about that. The one thing about it, in Bradley's favor here, is they did lose to Pickerington Central in the playoffs last year. I mean, yes, you can't say, well, we're going to try to avenge that loss, and that's why we're focused on. I mean, you can't necessarily do that, but it does it is going to play to the emotions of the kids a little bit. I mean, you got to know it's going to be in the back of their heads. And Bradley has been slowly inching its way to being, a state title contending type of program. I mean, 2 years ago, I believe they went 9-1, and then they got Pickerington North in the first round and they lost there. Last year, they go 10-0 in the regular season. This year, they're only a touchdown away from being 10-0. So maybe this is the year they finally break it through.
Them and Liberty have kind of been on that same path, and we've seen Liberty get to the state semifinals. Bradley is the next one, but man, not only do you have Pickerington Central week 1, but then you have your 2 Hilliard rivals in the same region too. That's a tough road to hoe.
That's something maybe we take for granted a little bit, is the football factory that is Hilliard, Ohio. But I mean, you've got 3 high schools all in the playoffs, and I mean, Olentangy the same way, other than Berlin, first year school. I think that also speaks to the depth that you talked about earlier. I mean, it's just for fun sometime. Sit down and plot out like the best players from Davidson, the best players from Bradley, the best players from Darby, put them on one roster.
Make it all your team.
I mean,
an all Pickerington team.
I mean, it's just there's so many good players, and so Darby lost 14-0 to Davidson, 16-8 to Bradley. They're really. I mean,
I've been voting for Darby the last few weeks.
Yeah, they're really good.
I don't think they made it, but I've been voting for them.
I did this last week finally. I did.
8-2. I mean, they're always kind of underrated too.
I gave Canal Winchester a vote in the last couple of weeks, and not just because I covered them, just they happen to be one of the best Division II teams in the area. But yeah, you can't go wrong with about 9 or 10 teams.
Darby's always are a little underrated, really. I mean, Darby. Well, yeah, they're 8-2.
What about them against Clayton Northmont?
Man, I'd love to go Darby here, but Northmont is a team that's played a ton of good teams this year. They've played Hoover Heights Wayne, they've played Springboro, they've played Springfield. I mean, they've played a ton of really good teams this year. The thing is, if it stays close, we know Darby knows how to win those close games. They've had them all year. Every game is close. John Santagata doesn't blow anyone out, but he doesn't get blown out either with that. So if it stays
they
close,
make this a 16-10 game.
And they can win. Absolutely.
13-11.
Yeah. Which he gave you guys the best interview I've ever heard him give.
He was very good.
To you two.
Sure. But if this one stays close, they can hang there. Sure. Clayton Northmont has just had as tough a schedule as anyone, it seems like. They've played a lot of really good teams and survived it.
In that GWAC, I believe that's the league that they're in. I mean, which is an excellent league. Yeah, I can't think of a game in that Region 3 that's a bad one in the bunch. I picked Darby to win the game. I think they've got a chance to go out there and do that, but Northmont on their home field is a little hard to overlook.
Transitioning to Division II Region 7, where we talked about before with Canal, just on the outside, you mentioned your Super 7 vote. I voted for Whitehall this week for the last spot. They've won 9 in a row, lost to Westerville Central in week 1, won 9 in a row, beat London, which was undefeated. I mean,
big feather in their cap.
Destroyed London when you think of it. I mean, that was a mud bowl. You see the photos afterward from John Hulkenberg. And so that win, they win the MSL Ohio 5-0. They finished 9-1 in the regular season. They clinched their playoff spot. I mean, they had to. I mean, they controlled their own destiny, but they basically had to win to get in. They had to win 9 games in a row to get into the playoffs.
Yeah.
And so now they're going to Dover, and they're the road team, but Whitehall, they're another one with tons of athletes. With Ray Melbert at quarterback, he's a special player with his arm, with his feet.
Dover's been in the playoffs a few times over the years, although I don't believe they made it last year.
No, and I think Frank Durant wrote in his preview this week that Dover is going to see a player in Bird unlike anybody they've seen
for sure. Yeah.
Throughout for the first 10 games.
who were we mentioned earlier that was our perennial player of the week nominee? Well, Raymond Bird has been a perennial player.
Almost
and
every
he
week,
is
every week.
And he is a co-player of the week this week.
Uh-huh.
He finally got it in week 10.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to. I mean, this is Whitehall's third straight year in the playoffs too.
Yeah. I mean, you have to get there to start learning how to win those games.
Mhm.
So.
That's right. And then they had a close one against New Albany in the first round that they very well could have won last
Right.
year. Whitehall. And they would have eventually then, I think they would have played Walnut or New Albany, or I don't remember who they would have played the next week. But they've got to get through Massillon probably like everybody in this region does.
Walnut Ridge. That's a tough draw. I mean, because this is.
Yeah.
I think this could be Walnut Ridge's best team. I mean, it's their best team with since Byron Maddox has coached them. I think. I mean, they're 9-1. They've got a quarterback, Isaiah Murphy, 28 touchdowns and 1 interception this year. I mean, you don't hear things about that too. I didn't hear things like that. I mean, Julius Wood, Keon Magwood. These are great athletes they'd be great athletes if they were playing for an OCC school or anybody.
It stinks. Like you said, it could be one of their best teams. Coach Maddox's maybe best team. But man, Massillon, I mean, they scored 100 points in a game this year. I mean, I don't care if you're playing Brook Park Middle School. It's tough to score 100 points in a game. And they did that on a Friday night in a varsity high school game. Yeah, so... tough draw.
I asked on Twitter afterward if anybody could remember a time that somebody scored 100 and nobody responded, but
just the 96 that Beechcroft put up one year.
In 2008.
Well, and if you ever played Tecmo Bowl with Bo Jackson, then you did. Or maybe that may have cut you off at 99.
Sometimes there could be mismatches that are so bad that these teams accidentally score a lot of points. I know it seems crazy, but it actually can happen.
I think. Have we all? I mean, I've been to Massillon for games. I mean, that's a great environment for. I mean, it's like a little mini. It's like a little mini. It's like a little mini college stadium. That I don't know if there are a lot of home field advantages in these playoff games. Like, will Pickerington Central be intimidated by going to Hilliard Bradley after winning a state title? I don't think so. I'm not saying the kids at Walnut Ridge will be intimidated. But that is a home field advantage.
Yeah.
That really, I mean, that's like I said, it's like a mini college stadium. There's like 20,000 seats there, and I mean that's a football factory.
They can go into this with a us against the world mentality, and you never know what can happen.
Or the best thing they could do is go in there with a nothing to lose mentality.
Yeah,
they're just going to throw it all on the table and see where we end up.
Mm-hmm. We can jump now. Let's jump to Division 3 and talk about Hartley, which is the #1 seed. Hartley plays Athens. Couple state championships recently. Different roster now, but same coach. So Hartley's now those previous titles we know were in lower divisions. Now they're in Division 3, where they were regional runner-up last year.
Regional runner-up last year.
So,
I know
cover Hartley. So how do you see it?
Well, I know from talking to Coach Birchfield over the years, he's always been like, well, what division does it necessarily really matter? Like the years that they had to play Coldwater for the Division 5 state championship, that Coldwater team probably would have beat the best Division 3 or the best Division 2 team that year. That's why they've never really been too concerned about, well, we keep getting moved up to divisions. But it doesn't bother them. And the fact that they are the #1 seed, I think you have to look at them. They're definitely the favorite. Last year they kind of ran into a kind of a perfect storm, sort of. Tri-Valley, very well coached team, and things just kind of worked out for them. Now, I know people might be looking at, well, they only beat St. Charles 6-3. I wouldn't say they were necessarily looking past St. Charles, but I think they were thinking 2 steps ahead. My understanding, Jalen January only played like a couple of plays.
Yeah,
so,
he didn't play much in that one.
So they've been preparing for this, and they're certainly not. They shouldn't have any trouble against a team like Athens. I wouldn't think so.
I think the best thing that happened to Hartley in this region run here is that DeSales lost last week to Waterson, because I think that was the one team that could stand in their way. No offense to a Granville or an Eastmoor or a Sheridan or a Bellbrook who's undefeated, but there's no doubt this is Hartley's region to lose. And it's funny, we were talking earlier, Jared, you were talking about Jay Sheridan, some of the things, and don't worry about penalties. Brad Birchfield doesn't worry about penalties. He said, we're going to get those penalties because this is the way we play, and other teams aren't going to like it, and they're going to complain about it. Yeah, we may hold a receiver. If we get called, we get called. But he said
everybody holds on everybody.
And he said this a couple weeks ago on our preview show. He said, we've got a couple 1st and 20 plays lined up. I mean, they had 21 penalties called on them in a game earlier this year. But they don't care. Physicality, that's what they do. Who cares?
Most teams in Division III are not going to have that level of physicality that they have either.
And like you said, who cares what division we're in? We're playing Toledo Central Catholic every year. We're playing Clinton Massey. We're playing the Sales. They want to play the big boys because
they play a tough regular season schedule.
Yeah, they've seen like a Pickerington Central go out of state and play everyone. Who cares? Wheelersburg has won 36 straight games. Who cares? Put them on the schedule.
And it was, 51 to 20?
Yeah, because Brad Birchfield isn't playing for week 8. He's playing for week 15. He says it all the time, and it's worked for him.
And you mentioned the other two teams from Central Ohio. We have Granville and Eastmoor. Granville plays Jackson, not Massillon Jackson, the Jackson, and Eastmoor plays Hillsborough.
Granville coached by the same coach that was at Tri-Valley last year, Justin Buttermore, an excellent coach.
One time Hilliard assistant, I want to say. He was Brian White assistant.
I mean, if you're probably in a couple years when he doesn't have any more kids in school, if you're like a big Division I school around here, you might want to give him a call if you're looking for a coach to turn around a program.
Right. Are you his agent?
He inherited a pretty good quarterback too, with Cameron Crouch. I mean, he's been starting, I think, since he was a sophomore, and he's a very good player for them. I don't think they'll have any trouble with Jackson. I don't think Eastmoor has any trouble with Hillsborough.
I don't either. I mean, Eastmoor and Hillsborough is not used to playing the kind of athleticism that they're going to see when they go against Eastmoor. I mean, that's way down here. I got some relatives. That's like a 2-hour drive from here, and here they are. They got to drive to the inner city of Columbus. They probably could possibly be intimidated by that. So.
You talk about athleticism, obviously. Just looking ahead, if you get that Eastmoor-Hartley matchup next week, that would be a ton of athleticism.
That would be great.
That would be a lot of fun. East Side rivalry sort of thing. I don't know that those two teams have played. I can't remember.
They play scrimmages.
Okay.
Against each other a lot over the years. So they
know
each other.
Played Marion Franklin, but I don't think they played Eastmoor.
In Division 4, we have teams that are just a little bit outside of our coverage area. Bloom Carroll and Licking Valley in Region 15, London in Region 16. London was unbeaten, as I said before, until week 10, lost to Whitehall, but London had already wrapped up their playoff spot. But they were still playing to win because both teams were 4-0 in the MSL Ohio going into that game, so they were playing for a league title. London has a tremendous rushing attack.
Great offensive line.
That's what they do. Yeah. I mean, they're like Davidson. London is not going to throw the ball if they can help it. So, I know that we've seen them. They seem like a team, though, that could make a run in that division or in that region.
Sure, absolutely.
I think they have a very good shot at contending for a state title in Division 4.
I can never count out Licking Valley either.
Sure.
And Licking Valley has a great running back in Connor McLaughlin as well. But here's London's problem, I believe. They're in a region with Clinton Massey, who does the same thing London does, but I think does it a little better. And that's going to be London's problem. Also, they're down to their third-string quarterback. Not that they need a quarterback with Brennan Spees and KJ Price.
But if they did need a quarterback.
But we talked about it with Davidson. That's been one of the huge differences with Davidson is they could rely on that passing game when they needed to. I don't think London can, and I think Clinton Massey just does what London does a little better.
We have kind of the same situation in Division 5 where we've got Johnstown's the top seed, just a little outside our coverage area, and Amanda Clear Creek's in that region. Johnstown's in the playoffs every year. At least, it just seems like it's been 5-6 years in a row. They've made some deep runs.
Going back to the mid-2000s.
So they're a powerhouse. I would not be, it would never be a surprise to see Johnstown make a run and win a regional title. And Amanda Clear Creek has history. I mean, these are two programs with a lot of history, a lot of playoff success.
Amanda's kept it up even though Ron Henn left years ago to go to Chillicothe. I was a little bit surprised that they were shut out by Tays Valley. Now, Tays Valley is a pretty good team, one of those that didn't make the playoffs in Division II. I don't count out Amanda. The playoff pedigree that they have, those kids have been taught the same thing for years and years. I think they could make a nice run. Whether they're better than Johnstown, I can't speak to that. I don't see many teams below Division II, but I think at least they've got a chance.
I think that's the best thing you could say about Amanda right there is you're surprised that they got shut out by a Division II team. They're playing in Division 5. They're probably not going to face a team, even though Tays Valley wasn't the best team this year, they're not going to face a Tays Valley. Johnstown, though, is very good. You think of all those years in Division 4 where Johnstown went up against St. Clairsville, and they just couldn't get by St. Clairsville. That was their kryptonite. Funny to see if they'll have one this year in Division 5. I think you could be thinking of Johnstown as a state title contender. Got Coldwater sitting there, though, getting in the way. Maybe that's their new St. Clairsville.
In Division 6, Region 23, we have Grandview, which squeaked in as the number 8 seed, and they're going to Bainbridge Paint Valley. And I read Scott Hennon's preview on that the other day, and the Paint Valley Jason Peters, the Grandview coach, joked that Paint Valley likes to throw the ball about as much as Davidson, which means hardly ever, although we said Davidson throws a little bit more this year. When I think about Grandview, though, yeah, they're Division 6, but they do have some really good athletes. They have Hudson Jump, defensive lineman and running back. He's a state wrestling champion last year. Luke Lachey, as a wide receiver. We know if your name's Lachey, you can play.
For sure.
And so, do they have enough to beat a number 1 seed on the road? I don't know. But they do have some players who can make plays, who are physical, and
think about this. They've been challenged. I mean, they got to go against Whitehall. They got to go against London. They got to go against Columbus Academy. They're
Pretty
playing
tough game against them.
Yeah, they're going against all these schools that are a lot bigger than them. So I don't see them being faced. I'm not sure they can beat them, but they can. They're not going to be faced by it.
They had, this is, I think 2015 was their last playoff berth. So when Jump was a freshman, is when they made a run, I think, to state semifinal.
The funny thing about this, we talked earlier about Whitehall and Dover, and we know Dover hasn't seen an athlete like Ray Melberg. Paint Valley's very good, and they're used to playoffs. They hadn't made it since 2015 either. But, I think they've been in 4 years before that, so they're used to that down there. But I don't think they've seen an athlete like Hudson Jump or Luke Lachey either, so that'll be the thing there.
Yeah. One more division, Division 7, where we have 2 teams. Fisher Catholic, which is a little outside of our area, but Ryan will have some things to say about that. And then Jarrod, you cover Harvest Prep. They're back again with a little bit of a different cast, but undefeated.
Yeah, I mean, they're a young team this year, but they've shown that they know how to win. I mean, that's a program that they've he has his hands. Coach Lamont Smith has his hands on these kids when they're younger than just high school, and that's what you do to build a program. They've got he knows what his 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders, and 8th graders are doing, and that's why these sophomores and freshmen that are being plugged in are just filling in, just like they've been there all along, because it's a system that they've got going there, and they play great defense and they run the ball. They don't really mess with kickers. They just kind of go for 2 every time. Which
I kind of like that.
It's kind of cool. Yeah,
it's kind of the way the game's going, though.
It is.
Yeah,
it's what the Browns should do.
Chaser guy.
Yeah. They don't punt it all that often. They punt it a little bit, every once in a while. But most of the time, they just figure, well, if we got to get a yard, we ought to be able to get that. And they always, they've got, I think they've rushed for maybe 3,500 yards or something on the season. So
the year after
they lose Daniel Banger
graduated. So. Fisher?
Fisher Catholic is much improved under Coach Miller. I was actually out there yesterday. They've got some good-looking athletes. I mean, their quarterback, Caden Starcher, physically looks a lot like a Miles Fleming. from Hartley. He doesn't have the speed, I don't think, that Miles does, or maybe the consistency, but he looks the part. Daniel Turner is a heck of an athlete on the outside and back there at safety. Nick Kruner, their sophomore running back, he looks like a old DeSales fullback. You know, a Jake Gilmore or a JT Blueball type. He just has that build. The guy that, why is this kid playing fullback? The tailback is bigger than him, but he has that look. And Trevor Bowen, who hasn't played all year for them because he was hurt, is a big tailback. Their problem is they're playing Trimble, who may be the best team in the region. Trimble has 9 wins this year. 7 of those are shutouts, and the last 4 have been shutouts. So I don't know if Fisher will be able to put any points on the Tomcats, but it's going to be, they've got some athletes and some young athletes. Starcher will be back next year. Kruner's a sophomore. So things are looking bright for them. I just don't know about this Saturday night.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to wrap it up now, and I think what we need to discuss is, out of all the teams we discussed, the ones that you think have the best shot to win 5 playoff games, win a state title. We saw it last year with Pick Central.
Can I start with 3?
Yeah.
Let me
3,
start
5,
with,
10.
Let me start with these 3. Reynoldsburg, Dublin, Kaufman, and Hartley. Let me start with them, just because from a statistical standpoint, I think Reynoldsburg and Kaufman are clearly the 2 best teams in Region 2. So then you got to figure there's a good chance they may end up playing for the regional championship. And then when you get to a state semifinal, there's nothing to say they can't, that they can't win one more game or, make it to the state championship game. So that's why, as far as like the Davidsons and Pickerington Centrals and the teams in Region 3, it's just such a tough gauntlet. I'm not really sure which team would have the best chance. I mean, I think that Davidson, I think Pickerington Central, they both have legitimate chances at it again. And with Hartley, I mean, like we've said, we think that they're probably a very strong favorite to win Region 11. So that puts them where they're in the Final 4. So then it's like anything can happen then.
For me, Hartley, Hilliard-Davidson, Reynoldsburg, Pickerington Central. I'm going to interchange Reynoldsburg and Central because I think they're about even as far as their chances to win a title. I just have a feeling about Davidson. I think they're going to learn. If they do bump into Pickerington Central again, I think they're going to learn from whatever went wrong. What was that? Like a 1-point game?
17-14.
It was
overtime.
In overtime. That's just my gut instinct. But yeah, I can't bet against Hartley, and I sure don't like to bet against Brown.
They wouldn't play against each other till a regional final.
Correct.
Pickerington Central and Davidson if they both won their first 2 games.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's Reynoldsburg. I think it's Pickerington Central. Because I don't know, even in a rematch, even with Brian White, I don't know if Davidson has the athletes to hang with Pickerington Central. We know Reynoldsburg does. I mean, we've already talked about the athletes they have on that team, and then it's Hartley. Those are the 3 to me: Reynoldsburg, Pick Central, and Hartley.
I mean, I think Hilliard Bradley ought to be in the discussion for Region 3 also.
If they win the first game.
If they, but they are the favorite. I mean, on paper.
If they win Friday night, I'm all with you on Bradley.
How about a dream for this? Battle of 256 for the Division I state title.
Because
that's the only place it could happen.
That'd be
How
beautiful.
amazing
Or
would that
Reynoldsburg Davidson.
But I don't think.
Or Kaufman Davidson.
I don't
think
think.
that.
But I don't think we're going to see like OHSAA put the Region 2 and Region 3 champions together in the semifinal.
Well, they haven't the last couple of years,
Right.
so hopefully they win again.
They've gone 1, 2, 3,
Let's just.
4.
How about we just have like Reynoldsburg and Pick Central in the state final?
Or Kaufman
or like you
Davidson
said,
in the
or
state
Kaufman
final.
Davidson. Yep.
Yeah, that either one.
What?
Let's have an all Central Ohio State final. Although,
Which we were so close
you
to
know,
last
I grew up in Cleveland, but I live here now. Let's have an all Columbus
Steve
State
Blackledge
final.
will be putting out his state championship prediction story. It should be coming out in the next couple days.
Thursday, probably.
Last year, I think he picked 0 state champs from Central Ohio. So we'll see what happens.
And the interesting
And
thing
maybe
is,
we should have had Steve on to defend himself.
coming full circle with that, we talked about the depth. When would we be talking about an all Central Ohio Division I state final in the past?
Before last year, I can't think of another
Yeah.
time right off the top of my
And
head.
shame on Blackledge. 3 years in a row, Central Ohio's had a state championship.
He's trying to be impartial. I mean, it's tough.
Well, I think that we can wrap this up, and thanks for joining us. But as a reminder, on Thursday at 3:30, we're going to be going to Hilliard Bradley to preview their game against Pitt Central. Dave and Scott Hennon will talk to Coach Laparo, and we'll break down some of these Week 1 playoff games again. And then Friday night, Saturday, thisweeksports.com, coverage of the teams in the This Week coverage area. Follow all our guys on Twitter. We'll tweet out, where we're going to be, and we'll have writers and photographers, pictures, videos, stories. So it's a fun time of the year. 5 weeks to go. So again, thanks again for joining us. Jarrod, Dave, Ryan, I'm Andy. Have a good day.